This is the Comics Alternative, episode 274. Reviews of Why Art, Infidel #1, and Vampironica #1. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
That's right, and we've got three new titles that we would like to discuss on this week's episode. We're going to begin with Eleanor Davis's Why Art. After that, we're going to look at the first issue of Infidel, written by Pornsak Pichetshote. Maybe I'm mispronouncing that name, with art by Aaron Campbell. And we're going to wrap up with Vampironica #1 by Greg and Megan Smallwood. But before we get to that discussion, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the good folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts can be anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price, sometimes 50% off, but every now and again you may be able to find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
I guess this is not one of those now or again times, but we do have a bundle at 45% off, the DC Universe new variant edition bundle, 34 comics right there. Everything else, all the other bundles we have are 50% off at DCB Service this month, including DC Kids, DC Miniseries, DC Universe, DC Vertigo, Marvel Fresh Start, Marvel Legacy, DC New Age of Heroes, Valiant. It's a lot of bundles.
That's right. And, as we say almost every single week, it is bundle madness at Discount Comic Book Service. So whether you like to get your comics in bundle form or just individual issues or volumes, you really can't beat the prices at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com. They will take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
And really, isn't everything better in bundle form?
Yes, it is. Gene, we've got some really interesting titles to discuss this week.
It's a very diverse group.
It is, and I've been looking forward to this show for a while. But before we get there, though, there are a few messages, emails, various correspondences that we should probably share with our listeners.
Viewer mail, actual mail from actual viewers, and if it wasn't actual, we couldn't be doing this.
Mail time. Mail time. The mail's here. That means we get to see our old friend, Mailbox.
Yeah. Actual mail from actual listeners. And what you and I were talking about before we turned on the mics this evening is we've been getting more and more messages, whether it be via email or Twitter or Facebook, YouTube, what have you. Many different ways that people have been getting in touch with us. But there have been more over the past couple of months than we've received in the past. And you made the comment that one reason may be because we do let everyone know that we're available across various platforms. And so if someone loves to respond on YouTube, they can use that platform to get in touch with us. They prefer Twitter, they can do it that way. Email, so on and so forth. So I think that may be one reason.
Oh yeah, I think definitely. Again, because there are literally more ways to listen to the show than I can count.
Yeah,
because I don't like to take off my shoes when I count.
and we'd rather you keep your shoes on as well.
That's best for all humanity.
Yeah. But I think another reason may be that the number of messages we get from listeners kind of builds on itself. And what I mean by that is 2 or 3 people who write to us, we mention that they've written to us, we share their email or their message on a podcast, and then other listeners hear that and wonder, I think I will go and leave a message with the 2 guys. And so I think more people leaving messages increases the likelihood that others will get in touch with us, which I think is a great thing. We really do appreciate hearing from you guys.
Oh, definitely. And if you tell 2 friends, they'll tell 2 friends, and so on, and so on, and so on.
Like the old shampoo commercial. What product was that? I can't remember the shampoo.
I'm bald, so I don't pay attention to shampoo commercials. The brands mean nothing.
Well, you weren't in the 70s, though. Okay, so our first message actually comes from a brand new supporter on Patreon. Just this afternoon, as we're recording this, I got an email that we had a new backer on Patreon.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And his name is Aru Singh, and he is an official podcast patron now. And Aru, you will find your name on our website under the list of official podcast patrons. So we welcome you to this distinguished community of backers. And then right after I got a message that he had become a Patreon supporter of ours, I got another message that he had responded on Patreon, on that platform, to our, I guess, relatively recent interview with Karen Berger. This is from, I guess, back in January. And Aru wrote, "I really love this interview. Karen helped create some of my favorite comic books. I was so distraught when she left DC for whatever reason. I also love what she said about females in comics." That's in the interview. "I'm looking to work with female artists because of the reason she gave. I love the Berger books." And I should mention that Aru Singh also has his own relatively recent Patreon account. So if you want to find out what Aru does, and he actually does quite a bit of writing. He writes fiction, comics, and he also writes scripts for TV and film. He just recently set up his Patreon account, and if you search for him, Aru, that's A-R-U, his last name is Singh, S-I-N-G-H. Check him out and maybe go and support him just as he is supporting the Comics Alternative.
Thank you very much, Aru.
Yes. But we've also gotten a wealth of other messages across various platforms. And one that I know, Gene, you and I are particularly fond of is, it took place on Twitter from one of the creators that we discussed last week, Audrey Niffenegger. She is the writer of the book that we discussed, Bizarre Romance. Eddie Campbell her husband, did the illustration. And on that Wednesday when the show became available, she discovered it and then wrote us on Twitter, "Thank you 2 guys. We feel thoroughly understood. This is one of our all-time favorite reviews." And both I and then Eugene responded to that we appreciated those kind words.
Yeah, definitely.
But then she responded to our responses. Her follow-up was, "You were marvelously thorough. It's rare to receive a review that radiates with such attention to detail and thoughtful consideration. It was a pleasure to listen to y'all." We radiate.
We radiate. We're close readers. It's part of the training.
Yeah, well, we are 2 guys with PhDs talking about comics, so.
Yeah, and clearly got a lot of time to think about
it. Yeah. So thank you, Audrey, for that very, very heartfelt response. We appreciate that.
No, I was really kind of overwhelmed to see that, because that was so nice of them to reach out like that.
Mm-hmm. But we also got a response on Twitter from another creator that we discussed last week, Alessandro Maselli, who tweeted out to us, "Thanks for that review." So thank you, Alessandro.
Yes, indeed. People actually listen to the reviews of their own books. I'm not sure that I could do that.
Yes. But it doesn't stop there, because over the past few days, I also got a message from a listener on Goodreads. And this is from Carl, who on Goodreads goes by MK King. And he wrote, "Hi, Derek. I just wanted to let you know that I've thoroughly enjoyed your podcast. I started listening to it 2 nights ago and have listened to episodes with Box Brown, Dan Stafford, and J.T. Yost." And then he writes a couple of more, I guess, specific things about the books I read. So I'll skip that part. But then he writes, "I also listen to Ink Studs Radio, but would you recommend any other indie comics podcasts? Also, on my iPad, I can only access your archived episodes back to 186 or the earlier ones online." And I think that what he's asking about is something that actually 1 or 2 other people have commented on. About a year or so ago, we changed the plugin that I use to where people can listen to each episode from the show notes directly from the webpage. Mm-hmm. And when I changed the app, what I've had to do is to go in and add by hand, cutting and pasting, and then
hand coding, yay!
Yes, the code for the particular player that we're using, and that's just the nature of the plugin, which is a Libsyn plugin. They're our podcast host, so it's taken time. I'll do a few back episodes here, a few back episodes there. But the important thing is, thank you very much, Carl, for listening and commenting on the show. And I'm glad that you're enjoying those interviews.
Yeah, and somebody wants to dig deep into the archive as well.
Yeah, and something that Carl asked about what other comics podcast are you listening to? This is interesting because over the weekend, a few of us on our Slack channel had started to talk about that. And in fact, I think what podcast are you listening to, comics podcast, was a question that I had posed. And several people on Slack have been responding. So I want to thank people who have been doing that. And let's keep that conversation going. So, Carl, if you're listening to this, then definitely join up on our Slack channel, and you can find out what some of the other Slack people with the Comics Alternatives channel are listening to in terms of comics podcast.
Nice. These Slack people.
The Slackers, yeah. And then we got 2 messages on YouTube over the past week. Someone who goes by the name of Mepho Waslin 1, so Mepho Waslin 1, writes this about my recent interview with Gary Groth. "Good interview. Particularly interesting is Kane versus Eisner feud. I wish Kane had written about his feelings regarding Eisner. Both he and Groth are correct when they imply that Eisner is overrated. It doesn't really allow for context. Eisner stories are quite cliched, but miles over anything Marvel or DC were publishing at the time. Really, A Contract with God was the most mature dramatic work in comics up to its publication date. What came close? Historical stories by Kurtzman possibly being the sole exception. And truth be told, nothing Kane did in his entire career approaches the maturity of Eisner's later work." So, Mepho Waslin 1, thanks for that response. I really do appreciate that.
Food for thought.
Yes. And then Jimmy Owens on YouTube responded to our Jeff Lemire interview from last year, and his response was short and sweet. "Great interview with my favorite author. Thanks."
There you go.
Thanks to you, Jimmy.
Jimmy knows what's up.
That's right. We're getting more and more responses, emails, messages on every week's episode. Pretty soon, we're going to have to spin another series off, Comics Alternative Messages, to where the entire episode is just us reading what people have to say.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, because you need another episode every week to produce.
Yeah, although there's something a little too congratulatory and almost masturbatory about that.
Yeah, okay. Your words.
Okay. Well, let's start talking about other people's words and images. And we're going to start this week. How was that for a segue?
That was very professional.
And we're going to start with Eleanor Davis's Why Art. And this was published about 2 weeks ago on March 13th from Fantagraphics. And we have talked about Eleanor Davis on the show in the past. Last year, we reviewed her book that came out from Koyama, You and a Bike and a Road. And then I guess about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, we discussed her book through Big Planet, Libby's Daddy. We've also discussed her work. I think she had something in the very first issue of Now. One thing we didn't discuss of hers, though, is I think how I discovered her with her collection from Fantagraphics from a few years ago, How to Be Happy.
I love that book.
Yes. Wonderful. And maybe talking about her previous work, such as How to Be Happy, is an interesting way of getting into why art. Because when I read the solicit, and I can't remember like when it was solicited in previews, but reading that and then reading the description on Amazon, which is probably what the solicit in previews was, I got the sense that why art, and there is a question mark in this title, why art? I got the sense that this was going to be a more serious than humorous book on art, where Eleanor Davis was going to use the medium to discuss art in a broader sense. Not that it would be anything definitive, but that it would be definitely non-narrative and not be as humorous or ironic or as distancing, if you will, as she is in most of the other things that I've read of hers. What did you think when you first picked up Why Art before you started reading it?
Well, to be honest, I don't even remember what the solicit was. And I think when I saw the title, it looked very enigmatic to me. And I really didn't want to know much about it before I opened it up. So I had very few preconceived notions from what I'd seen from her before. I was not expecting anything straightforward. It seemed to me that if somebody like Eleanor Davis writes a book called Why Art, I'm thinking, what's the spin going to be?
Yeah.
But the book has narrative. The book has, I think, deep, heavy observations about art, but it also, at the same time, it's very playful. It's very meta in ways that I'm particularly drawn to. And it does a lot of different things. It's kind of a couple of different books, or at least its tone and its mode of operating kind of morphs as the book goes through.
Yes. Now, I want to read a couple of brief things that kind of set the stage, for me at least, of what this book might have been. Now, on Amazon, the first part of this description reads thus: what is art? It's widely accepted that art serves an important function in society, but the concept falls under such an absurdly large umbrella and can manifest in so many different ways. Art can be self-indulgent, goofy, serious, altruistic, evil, or expressive, or any number of other things. But how can it truly make lasting positive change? Okay. Then on the back of this book, we read, what is art? Or why art? What is it? What is it for? These are questions that have vexed scholars and historians, makers of art and lovers of art, since the beginning of civilization. What color is art? Can beautiful art be ugly? Can ugly art be beautiful? Does art distort life, mirror it, or duplicate it? Does art have a taste? And so, given these little blurbs, which are produced by marketing publicity people, or sometimes in editorial offices, these are kind of the things that I used to do. Mm-hmm. I got a sense that maybe there's something quasi-serious going on here. And then I opened Why Art, began to read. From the very first pages, I was dissuaded from that, from that assumption. It's like, nope, I do not think that we're in for a serious expository ride. Because I was expecting something not like, let's say, Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, but something in that mode. But it's definitely not that.
Yeah, well, the back cover also calls it witty and ardent. Ardent is a very interesting word that I haven't seen used to describe many books ever. which is interesting. But it also calls it witty, and I saw the witty on the title page, which tells us that it is the 4th edition.
Yes, I'm glad that you mentioned that. You know, when I said a moment ago, when I opened it and was immediately dissuaded from thinking that this would be anything serious, that's what I meant. The title page, why art, and then we see Eleanor Davis, Fantagraphics Books, but underneath the title, it says this is the 4th edition.
And very large. It's not even broken down and hidden in the indicia. It's right there, big old. It's in a big old typeface right under the title. It looks like a textbook. It looks like a textbook title page.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to.
Yeah, it's supposed to, but at the same time, that 4th edition just kind of makes you go, huh. Considering what the cover looks like, the cover does not make it look like a textbook, because the cover is kind of 4 hands reaching slowly, like drawn in Conte crayon, towards a shadow box, which has some brightly colored flowers on the inside of it. So there's 2 different kind of picture planes happening on the cover, 2 different art styles even. So there's kind of it's literally a reaching and a questioning with the hands there. So the cover does not look like a textbook at all.
Right. Now, if the title page didn't suggest that something is amiss, then what immediately follows that should definitely tell you we're going to have a good time here, because the book starts, why art? Before we can answer that question, let's explore some examples of different kinds of artworks. The most basic category of artwork is, of course, color. And then we turn the page, and we have, I guess, what would be a 2-page spread. You and I are looking off of PDFs. Yeah. But on one page, we see orange artworks, and on the other page, and some examples, and then on the other page, blue ones with some other examples. Now, this is all in black and white.
Yep, black and white line art.
And then you turn the page, and we have several other objects of art that underneath we see the words both orange and blue elements. Again, black and white. And it just continues from there. So what Eleanor Davis is doing here, I mean, she's obviously having fun with our attempts to understand, even define art. To say art is one thing or another is kind of ludicrous. I mean, when I think most of us discuss art, or when we refer to something with art, we assume that, roughly speaking, that our interlocutors understand what we mean by art. And we don't have to define it as having color or a particular size or what have you.
Yeah, I wouldn't really call the most basic category of artwork color. I'm not sure color is a category of artwork, or it's and like after color comes size, and you get big artworks and then small or petite artworks. And again, it's another one of those big flags that we're in for a witty look at this. This is not, at least it's not beginning with kind of a dry textbook definition of things.
Right. But on the other hand, it does have a quasi feel that something like this could be included in a textbook. Not a textbook on art in our reality, but in some reality, who knows? It could be. Then she goes on to include other kinds of, or even categories of art, including masks. That masks in art are a category. So we have kind of pleasant, aspirational masks. We have ugly masks. We have God masks.
The God mask. That might be my favorite single image in the book, because it reminds me of the Simpsons episode where there's a point to this. Believe me, the Simpsons episode where the Van Houtens are there. There's a game where you have to try to guess what somebody has drawn, and Mr. Van Houten gets dignity, and he tries to draw something, and he can't do it at all, because how do you draw dignity? It's this kind of blobby amorphous shape, and then his wife does it, and we don't see what she draws, and everybody goes, oh yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. And what the God mask looks like is kind of like Dignity.
So there's the connection.
Yeah, that's a long way to go for nothing.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this illustration is hilarious, because underneath this image of a man putting, I guess it's a mask to his face, it looks more like a bent tube that has an eye and a mouth on the other end. Davis writes about the God mask: fool people into thinking you're a god, fool gods into thinking you're a god. Gods speak through you, parenthetically, rare. But again, this is the sense of humor that Davis displays throughout this book, for the most part.
Yeah, and it's also, I was going to say, it's also interesting to note how the book is set up, because it's called a graphic novel. I think there would be some comics purists who would say that this isn't really comics, because it operates more like a picture book.
Yeah.
Even down to the mechanics of the sort of authorial sort of text is typeset. God mask can be used for purposes both spiritual and worldly on the verso page. Recto next to it is the drawing, and those captions that you just read out, Derek. Those are all handwritten also. So there's the authoritative text, which is typeset, and then there is the illumination of that authoritative text, which is hand drawn and hand annotated as well.
And so usually is on the opposing page.
Right, yeah.
Or the facing page, yes.
Yeah, at least at the beginning of the book. So it's operating much more like it's operating in the same manner as like some children's picture books do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing that we mentioned about this book that makes it different from what some of our expectations were going in, instead of being an expository text, it does take on more, I guess, narrative resonance. About a third of the way in is when this begins. Now, on the version you and I are reading, the PDF, we don't have page numbers, but it looks to be about a third of the way in. This is where in the story, the narrator, whoever the narrator is, begins including specific artists by name into the book. And so we're introduced to a variety of different artists, including Dolores, who becomes very important later on. In her kind of art, she's a performance artist, but she also incorporates hyposolidity. And then there's Richard, who's into paper mache.
Who appears to be made of paper mache, in fact.
Exactly, yeah. Mike, who's into sculpture and optics. Ju Long, sculpture and optics as well. And then Sophia, and I guess this Sophia is the reference to Sophia Foster Domino that is mentioned at the very beginning of this book in Indicia. And for those who don't know, Foster Domino is the creator behind Sex Fantasy, which was a mini comic and also, I think, collected just recently in book form. And then there are others as well who have specialties like painting or fabric art or concrete and so on and so forth. So once we start getting figures who are named and then we begin following what some of these artists do, the text becomes much more narrative in nature. So by the time we get to almost exactly, interestingly enough, halfway through this book, it becomes almost entirely narrative. And this is when, I guess, the story of Dolores and the other artists becomes central, because we see them doing their art in various ways. And then over time, their art turns into making little miniatures of them. Little miniatures, that's redundant. Making miniatures of themselves. And those miniature artworks take on lives of their own and start to do their own thing. And I don't want to give too much away here, but this is where I guess the more quote unquote serious part of why art really begins to come into play here. And what makes it, as you referred to earlier, as more metafictional in nature, right? Because there are a couple of ways of understanding meta or metafiction. One way is as a work of art or fiction, in this case, in the case of metafiction, that alludes back to itself as a work of art. So a classic example of that in comics is Grant Morrison's Animal Man, right? Where, well, he does this in various ways and throughout his run of Animal Man. But, one of the classic examples is when Grant Morrison himself appears as a character in his own creation. But a broader understanding of metafiction or meta art is art that doesn't necessarily reflect back to itself as a specific art object, but art that makes a commentary on art in the broader sense. So it can be a novel that comments on the act of novel making, comics that comment on the act of creating comics, or art in any way that comments on itself as a cultural product. And this is definitely what is happening in the last half of Why Art.
Right. And there's a long history of this in comics, especially. Winsor McCay, from 120 years ago was doing that. Or some of the, and even like 20, 30, 40, 50 years before him, even some of Topfer's stuff was doing stuff to make it clear that what you're reading is a different kind of thing, and it knows what it is, and it plays with the conventions. And this book does a lot of that too. It's one of the things that makes it kind of you brought up the Grant Morrison idea, where in Animal Man, where Grant Morrison becomes a character, he is the author, which is the character. And a weird thing happens in this book because we've got that whole group of artists, and they right about halfway through, they're starting to they're going to do a show, and they're doing a big gallery show. And this happens around like page 109, 110. The roof of the gallery is starting to leak. Richard the paper mache man, his paper mache head and giant head and giant hands get melted off of him, and suddenly he can draw. The smaller Richard can hold a pencil much more easily. He's actually very small in that picture. He's tiny. He's like sitting at a table, but he's sitting on his giant head. He looks like he's theoretically about like 3 inches, like maybe half a foot tall or something like that. But then on the next page, we see some more artworks getting destroyed by rain, and this is the text. The leaks are getting worse. Some key pieces are damaged, and the show hasn't even opened yet. And we're worried about attendance because of the storm. We can hear the roar of the wind and thunder. We hear shouting, explosions, rushing water, and the thrumming of a million insects. We?
Yeah, I noticed that.
There's no there's no character called Eleanor in the book of that we've seen. All the artists have names, and they've all been talked about in the third person up to this point. So who is the we? Suddenly, our authorial voice, whoever or whatever that is,
the detached
is one of the artists.
Art critic, yeah.
And I would say that it would become like a second person thing. Like we hear this, we're seeing this at this point, but it also says we're worried about attendance because of the storm. So that's not talking to you as if you're listening to the story. That's talking as if that speaker is one of the people in that room.
Mm-hmm. And then what they experience from this point forward, this big storm that is ruining their show, and what they do as a result of that, this is where the text kind of turns in on itself in some really interesting ways.
Right, yeah. And it's what I find interesting also is that one of the central things that helps them at this point is a shadow box. And shadow box is one of the categories of art that's mentioned earlier in the book. And the shadow box is the thing that you use to escape from your normal everyday life. Let me see if I can find that really quickly. Because it was interesting the way that it puts it.
You mean toward the beginning when she mentions that as a category?
Yeah, shadow box artworks can let you leave your ordinary life completely. And we have 3 examples of shadow boxes there: 18th century France, Atlantis, or the artist's apartment in Queens. So from a weird point of view, the act of the artist building a shadow box of her own apartment is certainly the opposite of getting rid of her ordinary life, but for the viewer beginning out of their life to get into somebody else's ordinary life, as opposed to getting into Atlantis or 18th century France. But then that idea of the shadow box, which again, we see a shadow box in the cover of the book, the shadow box becomes this weird kind of a liminal portal sort of thing in that second half of the book. And again, I kind of missed what that moment represents, but when we go back and read it again, this number one, this is a book that rewards not just close reading, but at least a second close reading, because you start to see the little seeds that were planted earlier on, like the shadow box. I love what happens in the narrative when the shadow box appears, because I start to go, did I just really see what I think I saw? And it's one of those sort of meta moments.
Right. And as you point out, it's no accident that the cover image of Y Art is of a shadow box with the hands.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that becomes important. And then, also along with this, and what happens once these artists do what they do, eventually find themselves in one form or another inside a shadow box, and then what results from there. The book ends, and by the way, by reading these words, in no way whatsoever am I giving away any spoilers just because it's at the tail end of the text. But the final words that are spoken here, and this is by Dolores. She comes almost like the de facto protagonist of this book, if it does indeed have a protagonist, and I think that's arguable. But she says three things across three different pages. Let's see what we do, show us how to be brave, and show us how to save ourselves. And that, within the context of what's happening at the very end of this book, I think lets us into maybe what some of the larger messages may be behind Y Art. Because, I don't know about you, Gene, but the first time I read this book, I didn't really know what I just experienced. And the question became not Y Art, but why did this book do what it did? Did I understand it? Or what did I just experience? But as you said, this is the kind of book that requires rereading and to go back and carefully try to find those connections that, at least upon my first reading, I really didn't see as clearly. But then going back and seeing what Davis appears to be up to, from the title page with the fourth edition on, it becomes a little clearer. And especially when you see these last words, let's see what we do, show us how to be brave, and show us how to save ourselves. Is that the function of art? Is this the result of art? What does it have to do with the question posed by the title? So on and so forth.
Yeah. And I again, like you said, we're reading a review PDF. This is a book that I want to have as an actual physical object as well. For a lot of reasons, but one of the things is, like, as you rightly point out, the last words of the book are not the thorough voice; it's Dolores' voice, and then and those take place over three gigantic 2-page spreads, and it looks like that last page where she says those final words is the last page of the narrative. I kind of think the next 2 pages are actually the last 2 pages of the narrative. And they are completely black. And all I'm going to say is we've seen 2 black pages before, and we're told what that means.
Yeah.
So that, again, that's something I caught again on a second reading. And that makes me go back and rethink a lot of things that were said in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I love the hell out of this.
I do too. And again, it's something that upon rereading a few times, I appreciate more with each rereading.
Right. Yeah. And like we said, it's the layouts are very spare, very spare, very sparse, spar and sparse. But so it's deceptively simple, or it could take a deceptively short time to read this 200-page book. But again, you've really got to, once you do it, you go back in the second reading will be slower, and you will make a lot of connections as you go through. And just the tonal shifts and things become really interesting to me.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier at the very beginning of this book where we are introduced to our first category, color, right? And so, that narrator, whoever that might be, that detached, more professorial type figure who is describing what art is or the function of art, tells us that, some art is orange and some is blue. There's no color. However, there is some color in this text.
Right, yeah. In one particular section.
Yeah, there's one particular section where one of the characters here, one of the artists, provides a kind of artwork. I guess it's like a talisman. Yeah,
and this is Sophia again. The
Sophia, right. And then when you pick it up and I guess move it, it changes you in terms of color. And Davis does represent the people changing color through color, but those are the only instances of color throughout this text. And, every other instance I can recall of reading an Eleanor Davis comic, there's been color involved. And so this was a little different for me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think again. How to Be Happy? I think there was short stories in a lot of different styles. There may have been a black and white one, but I'm not positive. I don't really remember.
Yeah, the vast majority is in color.
Right. Yeah, and again, the use of color here is very kind of
strategic.
Not even. Yeah, it's strategic, but it's also more for mood than for illustration. Because when it says hearing the notes of this talisman makes you turn different colors, and the figure that's drawn there is just flat, is one complete flat color, even though they're wearing clothes. It's just one color, and this really works well in a 2-page format of a book. And again, I've got my PDF open so I can see 2-page spreads at a time. And so as you flip through the book, you just kind of see it almost looks like really limited animation of that character as it changes colors.
Very interesting book. I'm glad we decided to discuss this for this week's show.
Oh, yeah, definitely. From there, we move on to Infidel.
Yes. From there, we move on to Infidel. Issue number 1. This is written by Pornsak Pichetshote. And again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. And the art is by Aaron Campbell. And this came out on March 14th. Now, Pichetshote is, if I'm not mistaken, primarily known as an editor over at Vertigo, right?
I would not know.
Well, I looked him up, and I did see that association, but also he mentions this in, I think maybe a 1-page essay at the very end of this first issue. He references his time as an editor and him wanting to be a creator, to do something more on the creative instead of the editing side of the comics business. And so the result we have is Infidel number 1. How would you describe what goes on in this first issue?
It's pretty complicated to a certain extent. We've got a couple who are their fiancés. The main characters, I didn't write their names down, of course. So Aisha and Tom. Aisha and Tom, right? And Aisha is Muslim. Tom is not. Tom also has a child from a previous marriage.
Chris,
right. And Tom also has a mother whose name is Leslie. Mm-hmm. And Leslie is perhaps not all that she seems. The first scene that we get with her is she's baking a sarlacc bundt cake for Chris for a bake sale, which is one of the funniest concepts I've ever heard of in my life. A sarlacc pit from Return of the Jedi. Unfortunately, it's from the special edition because it's got all the long tentacles, but whatever. And Aisha is plagued by some sort of dreams, and those dreams are pretty frightening, and they involve the smell of meat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
flesh.
That's how this issue opens.
Right.
with her in the middle of one of these dream/nightmares and telling us that the smell of meat is what accompanies these kind of visions that she has. But as we see throughout this first issue, as the story begins to develop, she is not only plagued by these visions within her dream world, but also in her waking world, because there are a few occasions where she is, and I want to get to this in a moment, where she's in her apartment building and she thinks she sees something, or maybe she actually does see something. We don't really know. This is, in many ways, I guess it's a ghost story or a horror narrative of some sort. And I think we'll get more of the ghost storyness of Infidel as the story develops into subsequent issues. Now, you mentioned that Tom's mother, Leslie, isn't what she appears to be. What we see of her, which is primarily what Aisha sees of her, she seems to be, friendly, tolerant. In other words, she's not racist. She's not anti-Muslim in any way. Although Tom seems to suggest that there's that side of her that she used to be a lot worse than she is now. But we haven't yet seen that yet.
Oh, we do see it once in a flashback. When Aisha's talking with a friend. I'm not sure what her name is, but we do get a flashback where the grandmother pulls the hijab off of Chris. Chris is playing with Aisha's hijab, and the mother pulls it off.
I thought about that, and again, we don't have page numbers. This is, I don't know, maybe a third of the way through. And this is a scene where Aisha is out, with her friend, and I don't know if we're given the friend's name, but that panel that you're referring to, and this is an image where Tom's mother is pulling the hijab off of Chris, who has put it on and, as a kid is kind of playing with it. And, Chris's grandmother says, "They don't know any better. Women who wear this let people get killed for drawing cartoons. They let men throw rocks at girls like you." Now, that could be a key to how Leslie, the mother, Tom's mother, used to be. On the other hand, the way that this panel is introduced, and perhaps I'm reading too much into this, it's an action that is represented at least 2 times removed, because in the panel right above that, Aisha's friend tells her, "Stop changing the subject. You told me what happened when Chris was playing around with your hijab." And so what happened, what we're seeing, and we're not seeing very clearly because the art is not as clear. It's a different palette. It's primarily kind of a blue color, is apparently what Aisha told her friend and what her friend is recalling, which leads to this one panel that we see. So my question is, how accurate is this representation of Leslie?
Well, yeah, it's complicated, but again, Aisha is in the process is put in the place of defending Leslie to Tom. Tom is the one who keeps saying that she's got problems. You can't trust that woman. Mm-hmm. And after we get that flashback panel, Aisha says that was years ago. And her friend says, "Yeah, but racism's a cancer that doesn't get cured. The best you get is remission," which is a very interesting way to look at the topic of racism. And mm-hmm. It makes you question that. It makes you question Aisha's acceptance of Leslie for who she is now, and it also makes you wonder if Tom isn't just overreacting to his mother, because it's possible the way that he talks about things that it seems like he just may have issues even more than Mom does. But the way that panel goes, it makes you think that if that flashback is true, Tom is probably more right than Aisha is at this point.
Right. Or if that panel is not an accurate representation of the past, then who are we to believe? And that leads to, I guess, a larger issue that makes me appreciate Infidel #1 is the way that it raises the kind of questions about the narrative that it does. So, for instance, that's one of the big questions. Is Tom right about his mother, or is he being a little overdramatic?
Right.
Another question that I come away with from this first issue of Infidel is what happened to Aisha that leads her to have the dreams and visions that she seems to be having. We don't know. It's something traumatic in some form or another, but we don't know exactly what happened. And then yet another question that is raised by the end of this is what happened in the apartment building? Because there are a few instances in this first issue where Aisha or someone will make a reference to an event that happened in this apartment building and why people have moved out and or don't want to move in. Don't want to live there. Does that have something to do with the visions that Aisha is having during her wakeful hours? What about during her sleep? I mean, we don't know. On the one hand, I can see where someone reading Infidel #1 comes away a little frustrated because of all these questions. On the other hand, I like the way that Pichetshote and Campbell have set up these kind of narrative questions, because they definitely have me wanting to read on into issue #2, 3, so on and so forth.
Yeah, you're right. It leaves you with questions, but again, I don't think they're poor storytelling. It's not a question of poor storytelling. It's a matter of dropping clues and trying to figure out and trying to put us more in kind of Aisha's. We're not even Aisha's situation. We're almost more in Tom's situation. What the heck is going on with her? But like you said, the apartment building that they live in was the site of a mass murder, and that's frightening. And the other things, another thing that makes you kind of question Leslie. Aisha's dreams are all about the smell of meat, and the thing that sets Tom off this time is that his mom, Leslie, offers Aisha to teach her recipe for ham, which is not halal. And so there's I'm not sure if that the meat rhyming there is intentional or not, but I mean that's it's interesting that for her it wasn't a trigger, but for Tom it was, even though meat is the thing that haunts her dreams.
Right. Yeah. And as you pointed out earlier, it's interesting that of all the characters in this book, maybe with the exception of Tom's daughter, Chris, young daughter, Aisha seems to be the one that is the most tolerant. Although of the characters that we're introduced to so far, she seems to be the one who would be most likely to be the victim of racism and anti-Muslim sentiments.
Right. And again, we get some things on we get some TV news reports about that also, and I do it's petty, but I really do like the one shot of the talking heads on television. And even though this is taking place on the PNM network for whatever reason, I'm pretty sure that skeletal blonde is supposed to be Ann Coulter.
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah, that's again, it's small and petty, but it was kind of funny just how oddly that face is drawn, even compared to the other two faces, which are distorted for a TV screen also. Right.
Actually, that guy the head right beside the skeletal Ann Coulter, if we want to call her that.
Skeletor Ann Coulter works too.
Exactly. Reminds me of Sean Hannity because he has that same general kind of haircut.
Yeah. Yeah, it could very well be talking about the rise of radical Islam. And speaking also of a shift in the drawing style we see on TV there, and then a couple pages after that, Aisha has an encounter. And that looks a lot of the book looks kind of almost like a overexposed photography or almost photorealism, and we get this shambling attack sort of, which looks a lot more like Bill Sienkiewicz or something like that. It looks painted as opposed to everything else, which is pen and ink. So that was really jarring to go through. So it's a frightening moment. just narratively, but the way that the character is drawn, and even the lettering of what the character is saying, the words are horrible, but even the lettering is in a totally different style than the rest of the book.
I like this first issue. This is one of the new Image titles that I would definitely like to continue with.
Yeah, especially because, to be honest, I read the last few pages several times. I'm not sure exactly what happens.
Maybe that's another one of those questions that
exactly.
we were discussing earlier. And because it's not entirely clear in terms of what happens on just a plot level, right? So the action that we see, and this appears, the last pages appear right after Aisha has what appears to be another vision. Leslie comes into the scene, startles Aisha, and then we get on that last page of story, Leslie holding up this knife, and we don't know from what we've seen what's going on.
Right.
But maybe what we're seeing, if it is, I guess to some degree or another, focalized through Aisha, it may not be all that accurate.
True. Yeah, it's hard to say. Although we're looking over Leslie's shoulder, and we see a reflection in that knife also, and there is more creepiness to come.
Yeah.
But yeah, no,
the ghost story element.
Yeah, this is definitely a book that makes you want to read the second issue.
And that's good because I've mentioned this on the podcast before. Over the past couple of years, I've started to get Image fatigue. I mean, I like many of their series, but one, they come out with so many new series every single month. It's difficult to keep up with them. At the same time, many of these series, creator-owned, unique in their own way, but not entirely so, because many of them are kind of similar in nature. And I don't know if it's accurate to talk about in terms of the more recent Image comics. And by that, I mean what we've been seeing since, let's say, 2012. I don't know if there is an Image kind of storytelling, but many of the series, both the longer ongoing and even the relatively limited miniseries that come out of Image, many of them are of a type, it seems to me. And maybe I'm not being fair by lumping many of them together, but after a while, I just get tired of reading the same kind of stories. On their own, they could be intriguing, but they don't strike me as that different. This does strike me as quite different because what I see the creators doing here is melding horror with something that you usually don't find in a ghost story of this sort, and that is elements of racism and an exploration of hate in that way.
Yeah, although have you seen Get Out?
Get Out?
The movie Get Out?
No.
The horror and racism deeply intertwined in that movie. Yes.
When did it come out?
Last year. That was the one where it's the director, the writer won the Academy Award this year.
You can tell I don't go to movies, and I especially don't pay attention to the Academy Awards.
Well, it was a big movie. It was in all the social medias.
Okay. Well, I'm lax there.
Okay, but this is a very different sort of story as well. But it's something else that's playing with those two themes.
Huh. Okay. Well, maybe something worth checking out.
I think so.
Gene, you want to move to the final comic that we're going to be discussing this week?
Yeah, our final comic is
speaking of horror,
is Vampironica #1, part of the Archie horror series.
Yes, and this is written by Greg and Megan Smallwood with art by Greg Smallwood. And I think this issue, if I'm not mistaken, also came out on March 14th.
Yeah, at least, because it wasn't even new last week when I went into my shop.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that this is part of, I guess, the Archie horror series. I've read not all of it, but, several issues of Afterlife with Archie. You and I, God, more than 2 years ago now, I guess, discussed the very first issue of the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. And then, I guess it came out last year, I'm not sure, Jughead, The Hunger, which I have not read. Have you?
No, I have not.
This, I guess, is the fourth title in this type of Archie horror comic. And if I'm neglecting one, our listeners let me know. So Afterlife with Archie, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Jughead, The Hunger, and now Vampironica. I liked Afterlife with Archie. I liked quite a bit Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Not having read Jughead, The Hunger, I don't know. I mean, I like Vampironica well enough, but I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, and I'd like to see how it unfolds, but it didn't leave me with the same feeling as I had coming away from the first issue of Afterlife with Archie in the Sabrina comic.
Yeah, I remember the Sabrina comic in particular being pretty meaty. Their narrative felt pretty strong as you go through. In Vampironica, what's here, again, is pretty much fine, but the story itself is pretty thin. Not a whole lot happens. A little bit does, and I do like the fact that the art style switches for the flashback and things like that. It looks kind of cool. And there's even the thought balloons when Veronica, not Vampironica, but when Veronica is thinking about Archie and Betty out on a date. We actually get her thought balloon is drawn. It's probably lifted from an old traditional Archie comic,
right? Exactly.
So there's some fun. I like the art a lot. The art is really engaging, but the story itself, just not a whole lot seems to happen.
And I think that may be the reason why I have the uncertain feeling that I had coming away from this first issue. Maybe if there was more going on in this first issue, perhaps if it had been a little longer, then I wouldn't feel the same way. But this is one of those comics that I started reading, and then a few pages later, it was over, and I was wondering, what just happened? I mean, not that I couldn't understand what happened, but where did the comic go? In other words, there didn't seem to be much story there. But this first issue does, if you go back and look at it, it does set up the premise, I guess, of the origins of Vampironica. But it's relatively simple and straightforward.
There's not a lot of simple and straightforward, I think is exactly it. There's not a lot of twists.
Yeah.
I mean, the only twist that there actually is spoiled by the cover.
Yeah. Now, Veronica, when the story opens proper, not, I guess, the first 2 or 3 pages, which take place, I guess, in current time. But then after that, we're taken back 3 days prior to that, which is, again, the origins of how Veronica became Vampironica. She wants to go out with Archie one night because she doesn't want to be at home and made to have dinner with a business guest of his father, or of her father's, coming over.
Right.
Archie's already got a date with Betty, and so Veronica latches on to Reggie, and she's about to leave. She comes downstairs to tell her dad that she's about to leave, and what I assume to be the dinner guest has attacked Betty's family. And again, this is no spoiler stuff, right?
Right.
Appears to be a vampire. He attacks Veronica. That's apparently how she turns. There's some action that goes on after that, but in essence, that's about it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's a the one moment of pathos is that the first time she after she's bitten, she runs out of the house. Reggie's coming in, and so she jumps in her car. Reggie's driving up to her house. They get in a car crash, and basically, Reggie is the first thing that seeing Reggie's blood is what turns her for the first time. Sorry for the spoiler, but then the way that it ends It looks like the plot will thicken in the next issue. The problem with this is that this really doesn't read like a first issue. It reads like a first chapter to me. It doesn't feel like there's not enough here. If this were a complete like a 6-issue or a 4-issue graphic novel collection sort of thing, I think it would feel more satisfactory because, again, it looks good, but just narratively not a whole ton does happen. So I think in a larger chunk it would be more interesting.
Okay, let me make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. What you just said is that what we have in this issue could be the first narrative arc of a longer story. I think you may have said something like a chapter. So do you think that this story, this first issue, what we have in terms of plot, is too compressed?
I'm not even sure that it's compressed. It's just there's only like 3 or 4 things that actually happen over the course of the story.
Well, the reason I ask that is because one of the things that I hear every now and again, that people have problems with contemporary comics, right? And I mean, like over the past 10 years, especially 10, 15 years, is whereas we used to have, when you and I grew up reading comics, you would have in one issue kind of a done in one story that, may be part of a larger narrative, but for all practical purposes, one, maybe sometimes 2 issues can contain a storyline. With more recent comics, you get, and I think
the decompression.
You get almost like runaway decompression. In Brian Michael Bendis, I always hear that he is accused of this time and time again. But because I don't really keep up with Marvel, I haven't been experiencing this with him. Is that over the course of not 1 or 2, but several issues, like what could be a first trade, not much happens in terms of key action. And so that's what I thought you may mean with this first issue, because it's probable that you could take the individual components of what happens on the level of plot in this first issue of Vampironica, and I don't want to say pad it out, but you could add more depth or thickness to it, right? So we only have just, 2 or 3 pages when Veronica is at home and discovers what happens with her parents. Well, maybe more could be made of that, and that could take up maybe half of the issue. Her being at home right before she discovers this. Or her regret that Betty beat her to the punch in asking Archie out. In other words, I mean, there are ways of making this story a little less condensed or compressed and adding more flesh to the bone, so to speak, since we're talking about a horror title. For me, it's I'm not sure what it is. I think the thing is that it's paced for something longer than it is. So again, I think in a larger chunk, it would be more interesting to read. But because things are kind of, to me, it feels just almost the opposite. Like I don't want things to be drawn out more. I want more happening in the issue. Yeah. I want more stuff happening. But that's maybe it's personal choice. I don't know. I mean, again, what's here is fine. There's not enough here to really hook me in. Because again, there are very few, except for the very last page. There's nothing here is really surprising at all based on the cover image. You kind of know the setup. Veronica is a vampire. That's pretty much what you get. And you learn the title,
and you learn right, yeah. Even before you see the cover, you can read the title. You know what the setup is, and we just barely get set up in this. Not a lot actually happens for me.
And you mentioned how it ends again, without giving away any spoilers or any more spoilers, I guess. In that last panel, we have the dinner guest. Coming in, and he says to Reggie, "Looks like you could use a hand." Now, who is this guy? I mean, he's obviously a vampire of some sort. But I mean, that's all we know about him. I guess we'll find out more about his background in issues to come. But I don't know. When I see him approaching Reggie as he's sitting in his car and he says to him, well, looks like you could use a hand. I couldn't help but think of that Twilight Zone episode, and I can't recall the title of it. It's where the hitchhiker keeps following this woman around as she's driving. And then when something happens to her car, he comes up and he says to her, I believe you're going my way.
That one,
which one I'm talking about?
I do. That one I don't actually.
Oh, that's a classic. I can't remember the title of it. But anyway, this guy coming up to someone in a car, and you know that something horrific is involved here. Something associated with death.
Yeah. It's fine. I would pick up a collection. I'm not sure that I would jump on the next issue.
Yeah. You know, you and I, before we turned on the mic, we were just trying to decide the order of the titles that we would discuss for this week. And we knew we were going to be starting with Davis's Why Art, but we debated, should we start with Infidel #1 or Vampironica #1? And we decided Vampironica #1, not because we didn't like it as much as Infidel #1, which may be the case. But I think both of us felt we didn't really have that much to say about Vampironica #1. What it is, it's good. It's interesting. It's just there doesn't seem to be enough substance, enough oomph there to carry on a sustained conversation. At least that's my feeling.
Yeah. One thing I did appreciate, though, is the Riverdale Gazette in the back. It's made to look like a newspaper story. Vampires, mythic creatures are all too real. A brief history of the vampire panic in Riverdale. And that vampire panic in Riverdale, that history there is basically the history of the Connecticut vampire. Also, the fact that there was a tuberculosis outbreak and people thought that the TB was related to vampirism, so they would dig up bodies and rearrange their bones. That's 100% true. It happened in Connecticut. Which I learned when I lived in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. But yeah, because they would like do things like dig up corpses and to have I think it was the arm bones would cross over the chest, and they would put the skull on top of the arm bones to try to keep them from coming back as vampires.
Wow.
And the way this puts it is that, well, was it just that, or maybe there are real vampires? So, of course, there are real vampires. But I like that nod to historical authenticity there.
Yeah, that is interesting. Of course, I didn't know that, so I wasn't able to appreciate it on the level that you did. But, one thing I really did appreciate about this first issue of Vampironica, and it's something you've alluded to already, and that is Greg Smallwood's art. It's really good.
Yeah, the art is good. The storytelling itself is actually very good. It's just, again, I
story in this first issue.
Yeah, I want more of it to feel as satisfying as it looks.
Yes, but maybe that speaks to what Greg and Megan Smallwood are doing here, is that they're leaving us definitely wanting more.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's definitely the intent. Yeah.
Another thing to note: this is the second Archie comic book that you and I have discussed in as many months.
That's freaky.
Well, for this podcast especially, nothing against Archie Comics, because I appreciate Archie Comics, but historically speaking, with the podcast, we haven't really talked that much about Archie. We've discussed Afterlife, the Sabrina title, but last month, I think it was, you and I discussed issue number 6 of the Archies, the Monkeys issues, because It was the Monkeys. And then now here we are discussing Vampironica.
Well, I guess we got to figure out another mainstream adjacent title at some point.
Yeah, from Archie. Gene, we started off this week's podcast by looking at Eleanor Davis's enigmatic but engaging Why Art. After that, we discussed Infidel #1 by Pornsak Pichetshote and Aaron Campbell. And then we wrapped up with another ghost-like story, or a horror story if you want to call it that, Vampironica Number 1 by Greg and Megan Smallwood.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the connecting thread because again, the horror thing does link Vampironica and Infidel in a way that I hadn't actually thought of before, just because the tones and everything are just so completely different. But there's at least a thread there. How do you link art in there? Well, there's a disaster. People are in danger, so it's almost a horror story. Let's say that. There's drama in all of them.
That's right. So there you go. Gene's Forced Connection.
Tune in next week for another episode of Gene's Forced Connections.
If you like to force connections with comics, then you should visit the website of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service, because they have such a wide variety of comics. And so you could pick, any number of titles at random and then try to do what Gene does and find a connection.
Stitch them into some kind of weird Frankenstein aesthetic of your very own.
That's right, but with comics at great discounts. And so that's the difference, between Mary Shelley and Discount Comic Book Service, is that you get great discounts. Okay,
and
I don't know where I was going there.
No, I know where you're going with that. Discount Comic Book Service will save you an arm and a leg.
I wish I had thought of that.
That's why there's two of us in the podcast.
That's right. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about this week's show. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
We're also on the emails. Two guys at comicsalternative.com get to the whole show. If you just want to yak at me, I'm Gene with a G at comicsalternative.com. And Derek?
I am Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can find us all over social media and contact us that way. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, Slack, and Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on Spotify, on TuneIn, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
All those places, anywhere, we're everywhere you want to be.
That's right. And we would like for you, our dear listeners, to join the growing legion of individuals who have corresponded with us recently. So we would love to read your messages on the next podcast episode or two.
You can be our correspondent alternatives.
That's right. So let us hear from you. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hey, what happened?